Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Dave Stokes. I'm a MySQL Community Manager, which means before COVID, I used to travel all around evangelizing MySQL products for Oracle Corporation. And now I'm doing a lot of these video presentations, and today I'm going to be covering MySQL 8.0 Replication Update. Please be advised, the slides will be available. I'll have the link to that later, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions live during this presentation. It's pre-recorded. If I'll be monitoring that as it goes. If not, my contact information is here, and we should do a Q&A sometime around this. So let's go to the first slide I have to show. Oracle Safe Harbor Agreement. Basically, I'm going to be speaking about the free, open, GPL licensed version 2 version of the MySQL Community Edition. If during the Q&A I get off on a future product, please take it with a grain of salt. That's what this legal document here says. If I mention anything about the Enterprise Edition, I will point that out. The Enterprise Edition has an additional subscription cost, but 99.999% of what I'm talking about today is the free and open source Community Edition. So MySQL 8.0 was a big change. It came out 2 years ago, April. Big advancement over our previous version, which was 5.7. And you're going to see just the tip of the iceberg of that. And there are a lot of facets that I can't cover due to the scope of this presentation, but hopefully we can explore them later. Now, if you're using MySQL 5.6 or earlier, but especially 5.6, please note it reaches end of life status for support and updates on February, I believe it's the 5th of 2021. If you're using 5.6, you need to get a light on and get upgrading to at least 5.7, if not hopefully to 8. Okay, for those of you who don't know what MySQL is, it is 25 years old. It's a relational database management system. Once again, the Community Edition is licensed under the GNU Public License version 2. We do have a licensed Enterprise Edition. With that, you get great monitoring software, a very fast backup, at-rest encryption, data masking, a firewall that learns your queries, and queries don't match your normal pattern get rejected, key change management, and that all-important support. Also, MySQL, since version 5.7, has been a NoSQL JSON document store database. What does this mean? Well, if you need to start storing your data and you're on one of those projects where they say, hey, start coding this week and 2 weeks from now we'll tell you exactly what you're working on, this is great for you. You connect to the server, you open a document collection, and you start saving JSON documents, which you can manipulate however you want, do searches, updates, deletes, however you want to do that, without having to set up relational tables or indexes or any of the other stuff you're used to with a relational database. By the way, this JSON data is available from the SQL side, and the SQL data is actually available from the NoSQL side if you want it. Also, we have a lot of other software that you may know about, our language connectors, MySQL Router, which I'll talk about a bit later, MySQL Shell, which is our new CLI, and things like InnoDB cluster. And there's a lot more out there, but we're kind of limited in time, so let me get going on that. So the first question when I start talking about MySQL 8.0, and I mentioned our previous version was 5.7, people ask, well, what happened to MySQL 6 and MySQL 7? Well, back in the pre-Sun Microsystem acquisition days, we had a version 6.0. It never really came to fruition, and the good stuff was backported into the 5 series, like 5.1 through 5.5. Now our NDB cluster, which is a 5.9's availability, shared nothing database that can replicate between data centers and all that, is used by companies like Verizon and other cell phone carriers to track you as you move between cell phone towers. It is highly available, but it's mainly an in-memory database, has a lot of interesting features, and it had been using the 7 series for a long time. So our engineering folks sat down and figured, well, we've made enough changes in the basic core product that we really earned the 8.0 series, and hopefully you'll agree with it as we go along here. So there were a lot of big changes in 8.0. The ones that probably will interest most of the folks here. Resource groups dedicate certain cores of your processors, two classes of queries. So if you have a low priority batch update that you want to do, you can dedicate certain CPUs for that instead of low priority. We also have a much faster backup now. If you've been using MySQL dump, it's great, but it's not exactly blazing. Our new shell has a lot of utilities in there, including an update checker. So if you're running 5.7, you can check for update, and it'll tell you what you need to change, if anything, between your 5.7 and your 8.0 upgrade. People run into problems with reserved words and using the old temp table and stuff like that. Also in the new shell, we have a dump schema and dump instance utilities that are very, very, very fast. Also, we compress a lot of stuff, like you'll hear later about the replication logs. They can get compressed on the primary and transferred in a compressed format and read in a compressed format on the replicas. We've got a new temp table that is extremely fast. In the past, if you were working on something and it hit the temp table max size, processing would stop, everything would be copied over to InnoDB and then restarted. Slow, inefficient, and not the best way to do things. Everything's optimized around UTF-8 and before. Why? Well, we wanted all 4 of the Unicode character set planes, and everyone loves emojis. Also, we've been on a CI/CD model since release of 8.0. So every 3 or so months you see a new release. This is a history. Last July we had 8.0.2.1, April was 2.0, January was 19, October was 18, and a year ago was 17. Well, why are we doing this? Well, it's a better model for us because it used to be we had to wait years to put a lot of new features out there, and customers didn't like that. We didn't like that because we had a lot of neat stuff that we were working on that we couldn't quite share with you. So we decided to share all this with you. Most of these are with plugins, which is a simple shared object that you load in the server. If you don't like it, you can unload it. It has no impact on you. Also, we have, since Oracle took over 10 years ago, had in place a lot of engineering rigor that really makes it a much better product. So not only are we giving a better product faster, sooner, and earlier to you, very well tested. All the components are tested together. Anything that's 8.0.2.1 has been tested with all the other 8.0.2.1 software, so we know that it works. We figure it's a better product. So this is a replication update. So I'm going to spend most of my time on InnoDB cluster, replica sets, and router. So what is MySQL replication? Well, hopefully you can see my little red icon here. You have a primary machine, source, and you have a database on here which you have transactions that are going on that changes the database. Well, what changes in those transactions is copied to a binary log. A second machine, or a replica, goes to the source and grabs a copy of that binary log and pulls it over, and it's now called a relay log. Now, this in turn is read, and it updates its copy of the database. So if you start off with these two databases on the far left and right the same, make a change over here, the change gets replicated over here, applied to this set of data, and you have two machines with the same information. Now you can have multiple replicas, you can have replicas off replicas, you can replicate only certain files or certain schemas. It's highly configurable, and this has been around for, I think, just about 20 some odd years. It's kind of the original industry standard for open source replication. Now we also added semi-sync replication about 5 years ago. The primary pauses until a preset number of the replicas acknowledge that it has received the log entries. They may not have applied them, but they have at least received them. This gives you a little bit more control over what gets processed. So what is replication used for? Well, it's used for backups. It's a great way to keep your primary machine flying while you copy it off to another machine, which you can halt to make a quiescent full backup. You can also use that for read-write splits, for scale-outs, and we'll see how you can use it for failover in just a little bit. Now, InnoDB cluster is a little more complex than our simple asynchronous replication. The components are, on your machines, you're running group replication, which is built on Paxos, and it's a communications protocol where all the machines in the group know what it's doing with the other machines, and it has a continual updated status of what's going on. Above that, we have MySQL Router, which is a level 4 proxy, very lightweight. Load that on your application servers. Your application servers talk to Router. Router talks to group replication, and the Router can do round robining. It knows which machines are least heavily loaded, so it knows how to address where your queries go to, and it handles all that. Your applications don't really need any knowledge of what's past the router in the application. And all this is administered by MySQL Shell. So this is how you set it up, this is how you manage it, this is how you orchestrate it. Now, I tend to be very cautious, longtime DBA. I tell people, go out and play with group replication with a sandbox machine before you try it in production. Sandboxes are nice. You have one machine. Typically, you grab an old tower or old laptop, install MySQL, latest version 8.0.2.1 in this case, and I'll show you how you easily set up a sandbox test and play with this InnoDB cluster before you actually have to make it work in production. First thing you do is you fire up the new MySQL Shell. New MySQL Shell name is mysqlsh. Give it your account and host of where you're going to. On this machine, this example, I did it on a laptop that I use for testing. After you log in, it's going to give you a prompt. If it's JS, it's speaking JavaScript to you. If it's PY, it's speaking Python. And if it's SQL, it's speaking SQL. The new shell has 3 modes. So if you have libraries in Python or JavaScript you like to use with your data, you now have access to those. So we've logged in, and here we're talking JavaScript. We use the DBA library, and we deploy a sandbox instance on port 3310. And if you read through the descriptions down here of what's going on, it's going to warn you sandboxes instances are only suitable for deploying or running our local machine for testing purposes. It doesn't set up the networking rules to be working from other machines. You can do that, it's a little bit of pain. Set up a MySQL root password for this new instance. We're going to use 3 machines today, so I recommend using the same password on all 3 machines. And it sets up a new MySQL instance, and it tells you that it's been successfully deployed and started. Now we're going to start up a second instance. This one is going to be on 3320. The first one was on 3310. By the way, if you look under your home directory, you'll see there's a new directory called MySQL-Sandboxes, and you'll have one for each of the machines. So after we got the second machine up, we do the same thing for the third machine, deploy sandbox instance at 3330. So now we have 3 machines all running MySQL InnoDB cluster. Now to get the cluster actually connected and started, we have to connect. So we're going to connect to root at the first machine. We could have picked 3320 or 3330. It doesn't really matter. Put in the password we want, and it's going to tell you that you've connected to the first machine, and we're actually going to go out and create the actual cluster. So in JavaScript we have var cluster equals dba.createCluster, and this one we're calling cPanel. This originally came from a demo I did for the good folks at cPanel. So it starts up and it starts detecting that it is a sandbox, which this is the same command you use for a non-sandbox version. It reports its own instance at 127.0.0.1.3310, and it's saying the configuration is suitable. When you're doing this in real life, if the cluster hardware that you're trying to use is not suitable, or you have settings that aren't right, it will ask you if you want to change them, change them and reboot them for you. So in this case, the configuration is suitable, one of the benefits of using a sandbox. creates an InnoDB cluster called cpanel at 3310, and it takes the first instance as the seed, and it warns you that at least 3 instances are needed for the cluster to be able to withstand up to 1 server failure. Okay, add the second machine, cluster.add instance, root at localhost 3320. It's going to say, hey, this machine has not been pre-provisioned. We have 3 brand new machines, so there's really nothing out there. And it's going to warn me that the global transaction identifier set is empty. Every transaction has a unique identifier ID. And in this case, the shell is warning us that we're not quite sure the state of what's going on here. You know, you haven't had any transactions, so we're kind of wondering, and there's nothing in the old transaction log, so it kind of warns you that, you know, there's something funny going on here, but in this case you don't have to worry about it. Now, the next page you'll see it's going to ask you to select a recovery method. In this case, we're going to pick C for clone. Clone you'll see in detail a little bit. Incremental, it tends to go over to the host machine, the donor machine, and grab over those transaction IDs in small groups and apply them to its copy of the data. So this second machine really has no idea at this point what's on the primary machine. So it can either get spoon-fed or it can get a whole bunch at any one time. Now, notice this here, group replication is going to communicate with other members at port 33201. So if you really are firewall happy, please watch out for that. But if you're just running this on a Sandbox laptop or tower, don't worry about it. So it's going to look at the second machine at 3320, make sure the configuration is correct for that instance, and starts the instance at 3320, and it tells you that the new instance will be added to the cluster. Depending on the amount of data, this cluster might take a few seconds to several hours to get everything going. So as this machine comes up, it goes out to the primary, and it does a big, fast InnoDB tablespace copy from the donor machine. Since there's only one other machine on the cluster right now, that's going to be our primary. And it goes out there and grabs the files, the pages, and the redo copy. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And very quickly, you have an exact clone of the primary machine. Now, this is written to be a fast way to get new machines up. Those of you who have been working in the cloud know that one of the big problems with databases is they're not designed to be ephemeral. You kind of want your permanent data to be permanent. Bringing on a temporary copy can be very expensive. If you're using MySQL dump or something similar to bring everything over, it's slow and rather labor intensive. With the clone plugin, it allows you to take everything from a donor and put it on a recipient as fast as you can get it over there. So we're still in the process of adding the second node to the cluster. The second cluster gets all the new data, it restarts the second machine, and it gives you some information on how much data was transferred, and now we have 2 machines in our cluster. So of course we add the third machine. It's going to ask you whether you want to clone and do the normal backup. Hopefully you're using clone. And if we type in cluster.status, you're going to see our cluster name, and it's going to tell us that we have 3 machines. Notice the status here, cluster is online and can tolerate up to 1 failure. If we do have a failure for some reason, or you take a machine offline, these 3 machines, or the 2 machines left over, will communicate and promote one to the primary, and will warn you that it's no longer going to tolerate 1 failure, so it's no longer highly available. First machine 3310 is in read-write mode, 3320 and 3330 are in read-only mode, and our topology mode is single primary. So when your query goes through MySQL Router to this cluster, if it's going to be a write, it's going to go to this machine. If it's a read, it's going to go to any of these 3 machines, and it will round robin, and it knows which ones are busiest and will route your packets to the slower unladen machines. So let's start up MySQL Router. Router is a very simple level 4 proxy. If you need something more advanced, I recommend Proxy SQL. It's a level 7. It's a little more complex to get running, a little more hardware needed to get going, but Router is designed to be very quick and very simple to set up. MySQL Router minus Bootstrap for the first time, which machine is your primary, and you need a directory to write out some configuration information. Now, the next time you bring up Router, all you have to do is point it to the configuration information, and away it goes. Now, once you have Router started, it's going to need a little bit of adjustment for you. Traditionally, MySQL listens on port 3306. Since you're using the proxy in front, your application is going to want to talk to a set of addresses. If you're using our classic protocol, it's going to do localhost 6446 for read writes, reads to 6447 for read only. Now, if you're using our NoSQL protocol, the X protocol, you're going to see that you're going to talk to those port numbers with a 10 added. So 64460 is 64470. Now, the architecture, as I mentioned earlier, is your application and MySQL Router are all on the same platform. Your application doesn't need to know any of the stuff down here, it just needs to know how to talk to Router. Router, in turn, monitors all this. So it knows how the group replication is running, which machines are loaded, which ones are unladen, and it's all administered by MySQL Shell. What if you want multi-primary? What if you want multiple primary machines? It's very easy to do. Cluster.switch to multi-primary mode. There's also a switch to single primary mode if you want to do the read-write split. And as you see, pretty quickly it switches the machines that were secondary to primary. Our primary stays primary, and the other secondary becomes primary. We check the cluster status. You'll see that our machine at 3310 is read-write, 3330 is rewrite, 3320 is rewrite, and the topology mode is multi-primary. MySQL Router detects if there's a failover. The big change here is that when you do your writes, check the return code. If something has failed, you'll get an error and you'll have to retry that write. If you're doing this in production, the big difference here is that you're going to have to use dba.configure local instance to make sure that not only is the hardware, but the MySQL settings are correct for running group replication. And then it's very much the same as you saw earlier. Create the cluster with create cluster, add the instances, and start up Router. Now, ReplicaSet is designed to make semi-synchronous and asynchronous replication easier. In the early days of setting up replication, what you do is you'd have your primary machine and you'd build the secondary. You'd do a backup of the primary, copy that over to the secondary, get that version, that instance of MySQL running, find out where the log was set up, the log pointer is on the primary, tell the replica to start replicating from that binary position in the log file and copy things over. Global transaction identifiers made that a little easier since everything had its own identifier number. So the replica would be told, okay, go out to this primary machine and copy everything down from this identifier number. The identifier number could be the first one until you catch up. Replica Set automates a lot of the setup for that, so you don't have to do a lot of the labor-intensive stuff, which makes this a lot easier for automation. Now, Replica Set has several limitations, and when in doubt, please use InnoDB cluster. That's what we highly recommend, and there's no automatic failover. So if you are looking for that, you want a highly available system, go to InnoDB cluster. Also, there's no protection from data loss. The other machine in your set doesn't have the smarts to figure out how to recover from the first machine or the other machine going down. Also, there's no way to handle a split brain. With InnoDB cluster, you have a split brain situation, and the machines realize it almost instantaneous. First thing they do is they go into a super read-only mode. So you still read the data, you cannot do updates until someone repairs the system. Configuring Replica Set, very simple. dba.configure Replica Set. Create the Replica Set, and then add the second machine. Now, the benefit here is that you do get the benefit of the clone. You don't have to go out there and make the backup, copy things over, and tell it to start reading from a certain position or a certain GTID. Now, if you have an existing replication setup out there, you can do that. You can adopt that one with an option on the create replica set command. Now, something we've added with the latest release is you can turn off the redo log. When you're setting up a replica, one of the big problems is it wants to set up a redo log in case something gets rolled back in a transaction. But if you're basically cloning another machine or restoring an old machine, you already have a copy of that out there. You don't really need it. So this is a lot of overhead. So if you turn off the redo log while you're restoring this machine, it speeds things up dramatically. This is something that we've had a request for a long time. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the binary logs, the ones where the changes are made to the data, are written in a compressed fashion using ZSTD, and that is copied over to the replica or replicas, still compressed, and the replicas read them while they're still compressed and do that, which saves a little bit of disk space and a lot of network bandwidth. By the way, if you're really interested in MySQL 8, former colleague of mine, Jesper Wisberg Crow, wrote the best book out there on the subject. If you have something like the old high-performance MySQL books, they're kind of long in the tooth. This one's written specifically for MySQL 8.0. You need a copy of this book. It is great. Also, if you're looking for MySQL on the internet, you can get us on our community Slack, mysqlcommunity.slack.com. We still have our forums out there, which is a good place to catch the eyeballs of our engineers. A lot of them are on the Slack. We still have mysql.com and our blog aggregation at planet.mysql.com, and you can follow us on Twitter at MySQL. Now, if you need to get in contact with me, I'm at Stoker on Twitter. Email is david.stokes@oracle.com. My blog is elephantdolphin.blogger.com, and the slides for this and my other presentations will be at slideshare.net/davidmstokes. And if you're using our JSON data type and you're really interested in some good examples, I wrote a book called MySQL JSON: A Practical Programming Guide. It's the first edition. I am working on a second edition. Hopefully I can get that out there soon. And let's see if we can roll into Q&A. If you don't have any questions or want to contact me otherwise, thank you for your time, and let's roll into Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dave. So now let's go to the question and answers. So the first question we have is, last I heard, MySQL was dropped from Debian due to reservations from the security team about the MySQL security patches only being provided in Cumulo. Is that true? Still the case? And is Oracle maybe considering changing this in the future?
Okay, just a small one here. Dave, could you please unmute yourself?
There we go. Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, let me re-answer that. Part of the trouble is we were requested by the Debian security team to hand over all our test case data. We cannot do that. Some of our test case data is customer confidential, and by contractual obligation, in some cases, laws, we cannot do that. So if you want to run MySQL 8, we do have a Debian repo out there, and you can download all the files and get it going. Unfortunately, we cannot match what the security team wants.
Okay, let's go to the next. Will be the slide available afterwards?
Yes, they are. I uploaded that along with the video. If that doesn't work, follow me on Twitter at Stoker. I'll make sure I get them up there on my slide share right away, and I'll make sure that gets out there. So that's at STOKER.
Good. Next one is the MySQL Router execute in a different machine, or is a process in one of the cluster nodes?
I recommend putting it on your application nodes. Your application doesn't have to know anything other than how to talk to router. It shouldn't really know much about the data store past that. So it's much easier to run it right alongside your application. Now, if you need something more complex as a router's only a level 4 router. If you need something like a level 4 router, if you need more than a level 4 router, I recommend proxy SQL. And that runs at level 7, and I do believe you need a dedicated machine or two for that.
Great. And finally, please, will you name the book recommend at the end, the black one?
Oh, the black one. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can grab it. Ka-thunk. Okay, folks. The book you want is MySQL 8 Performance Tuning by Jesper Rigsborg-Crow. He used to work for MySQL. He's now gone on to some different work. This is the book on MySQL 8. This is my third time reading through it, and it's one of those things where there's an epiphany every couple pages for me, and I've been using MySQL since it came out. It used to be everyone loved MySQL High Performance by Peter Zaitsev, Vladimir Trichenko, and Baron Schwartz. Unfortunately, that's getting a bit long in the tooth, but this is the book. And thank you for the folks I'm reading on IRC. Thank you, dear Hans and folks.
And finally, what is the dog's name?
Oh, she's gone. That is Boo. Boo is a southern blackmouth cur. Let me see if I can get a picture of her. Unfortunately, I gotta kill off the phone and bring it back. This is Boo. She is a southern blackmouth cur. She is a very intelligent dog. Kind of scary having a dog that the first thing she does is go up and start opening doorknobs. Also, you'll see a old beagle wandering around, and his name is Jack.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
See you. Bye.
Adios, amigos.